We're going to talk about what is DevOps, which is a question I'd like to know the answer to, as I've been looking at this particular subject for a while. So we're going to look at a few things. We're going to look at what the DevOps problem is, because DevOps, by its nature, was set up to be ambiguous. It wasn't meant to have a definition. It was meant to be more of a direction than a thing. We're going to look at the problem that it's trying to solve, look at where we might find the solution, and throughout this evening, I want you to pay very close attention, because at some point there will be the classic 1970s car, the Austin Allegro, and this is very important to the DevOps movement. So if you see it, make sure you pay particular attention. Okay. A little bit about me. I should introduce myself. Hello, I'm Andy. I lead DevOps engineer in the data tribe here at SkyBet and Gaming. Don't let these youthful looks deceive you. I'm middle-aged, which means I've done a lot of stuff in IT. I've done lots of dev, from mainframe to web to desktop, front-end, back-end, lots of platforms, lots of databases, more recently infrastructure as code and big data technologies like Hadoop. I also run the Leeds DevOps group. If you are into this stuff, Google it or talk to me at the break. I will tell you all about DevOps. You may regret starting a conversation with me about it, because I will talk about it forevermore. That is my Twitter handle. Should you wish to troll me or even ask me questions, I like the attention. Please feel free. So that's what I do, but what do we do here at Sky Betting and Gaming? Well, we're probably best known for our products we have here. We are an online business. We're an online bookmakers. We don't have shops. What we do is online. So when we're offline, we don't make money. And due to the bizarre nature of the gambling industry, when we are online, sometimes we even lose money. But that's how the gambling industry works. We have our sports betting product, so SkyBet. So that's betting on all the top sports. So football, horse racing, greyhounds, golf, tennis, Britain's Got Talent, elections even. So all the top sports. And we have a number of gaming products as well. So slot machines, roulette, poker, bingo, some free-to-play games, and our odds comparison site. So that's kind of what we do with Sky Betting and Gaming. So meanwhile, back to DevOps. So what is the problem that DevOps is trying to solve? Well, this is usually the way we explain it. We explain it with two different teams with two different objectives. This whole misaligned incentives. On the left-hand side, we have our development teams who are charged with writing code and releasing features. And on the right-hand side, we have our operations team who are charged with uptime and stability, which means you've kind of got one team that wants to change all things and another team that wants to change nothing. That doesn't necessarily work very well, particularly when they have different incentives, they have different budgets and different managers, all trying to pull in different directions. And if we take the wall in the middle as representing the teams not talking, not communicating, not working together, then understandably, when there is a release that's handed off from the dev team to the operations team, environments aren't quite the same. Dev, test, and stage and live are all a bit different, so nothing really works the first time. And then ensues what can only be described as a bit of a squabble. In the worst case, that can be pretty nasty infighting. So with DevOps, we're trying to solve this problem of flow, of getting releases from the devs through onto production and running as quickly as we can and iterating upon that. So we have all these problems. We have these teams not working properly. We have them misaligned. We've got all this ineffective process, because process is good, and when things aren't working, let's add some more process. That'd be a good idea. And quality, efficiency, and more importantly, morale is suffering of the teams that are working on this stuff. And everyone's busy, but nothing's getting done. And this isn't to say that these developers and operations people aren't skilled individuals. They aren't good people. They're just not working effectively. And I was watching the TV show a few months back. It wasn't about DevOps, but I sort of thought it was after a while. This whole idea of industries having problems and squabbling and not getting stuff done reminded me of this particular show, which is, not surprisingly, about cars, about the automotive industry. That URL there, we'll try and share the slides. It's still available. You might want to watch it. And in this program with James May talking, he spoke about the rise of the Japanese car manufacturing industries and demise of the US and the UK industries. And this is where the Allegro comes in. I kind of liked the Allegro because my mate had one. It had the grille at the front of Vanden Plas. It was a weird thing, but I kind of liked it. But he interviewed 3 groups of plant workers and designers from the motor industry in the 1970s. One group from Detroit, who worked for General Motors, another group who worked for Toyota in Toyota City, and then the designer of the Austin Allegro. 3 very, very different stories came out. Well, the guys in the US, they were kind of arrogant about their cars. Their whole industry was. And this was a whole load of hindsight as well that the guys have applied. They were very much function over form. Form over function. They weren't necessarily concerned with reliability, and they kind of looked down on these little Japanese cars, when in fact they were actually really well built, really reliable, and very good value for money. And he contrasted that with the attitude of the Japanese workforce, who didn't have this superiority complex between the workers. They had this work ethic, and more importantly, they had this whole idea of collaboration between the teams. There was none of this blue-collar, white-collar stuff, which again is very different to the UK in the 1970s. I'm old enough just about to remember this stuff, but the 1970s were a pretty bleak place in the UK with lots of strikes and 3-day work weeks and power cuts. And basically the union intervention into the car manufacturing process pretty much drove it onto its knees. You combine that with a workforce that isn't willing to talk to management, and a management isn't willing to talk to the workforce, you've got some serious delays and problems within industry. And out of the 670,000 Allegros that were made, this is in the mid-70s, when we just joined something called the Common Market. You might have heard of it recently. Only 4% of those cars were exported. And that meant that in the end, Austin Leyland, which became Austin Rover and then Rover Cars, became, it's gone now. It's not there anymore. So I'm sure you're saying, how the heck did Toyota manage to create this culture? How did they manage to build these reliable cars that were cheaper and much more efficient as well? Well, they invented something called the Toyota production system. And ironically, it was the brainchild of an American guy called Deming. He was a student of a professor of statistics control. I think that's what it's called Stewart. And he brought in a load of new ideas and concepts into Japan shortly after the Second World War. And those ideas were adopted by, amongst others, Toyota. So Ono, who's largely attributed with the creation of the Toyota production system, used these ideas and principles to build a way of making cars and manufacturing really efficiently and reliably. And this Toyota production system was then kind of exported back to America in the 80s by Graphic, who brought it back as something called Lean. You've probably heard of Lean software development, Lean Enterprises, Lean UX. And that was then adopted by the US manufacturing industries to actually start building cars like the Japanese. And there's some really good principles inside Toyota production system Lean. It's all based on Japanese words and Japanese phrases. There's a bunch of them. These are on Wikipedia, just Wikipedia for Toyota production system. You'll see many of these. The one I like is Muda, because that's non-value waste. This is getting rid of waste, particularly in manufacturing. It's like waste parts and things that didn't go together properly. But in IT, when we think about waste, we're probably thinking about time is kind of the raw material, isn't it? This idea of Kaizen, this continual improvement. Jidoka, automation. And I like Pokeyo just because I like the word, not that it's particularly meaningful. But it means mistake-proof, and it means building stuff so you can't put it together the wrong way. Like that. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that kind of makes sense if you study it. So, meanwhile, back in IT, because car manufacturing is fascinating, but how the heck does this relate to DevOps? Well, in software development, by the early 2000s, we'd kind of solved a lot of the problems with developing software efficiently because we'd come up with Agile. So we were building software in an iterative manner, based on MVP usually, building stuff people wanted and needed rather than what they kind of thought when they started a big long documentation process several months earlier. But this is great, but this is about building software. This isn't about running it. And this is really where the roots of DevOps comes from. This search for agile systems administration, really. And it started with Patrick Dubois and Andrew Schaefer who met at an Agile conference in the States who were looking for an answer on this. They had a conversation grew online, other people got involved. And then you got this kind of light bulb moment for DevOps, where John Allspar, who was at the time at Flickr, did a presentation at Velocity where he explained about 10 deploys a day. Remember, this is 2009. I don't know how many deploys you were doing a week or a month back in 2009, but I bet it wasn't 10. So this was kind of like the impetus for them to actually do something about it. So the conversation then started basing a lot around these theories, and somebody said, why don't you have a conference about it and speak about this stuff? So Du Bois did. He created something about dev and ops. It lasted a couple of days, so he called it DevOps Days. And that's stuck with us ever since. One of the first American attendees at the first DevOps Days was a guy called John Willis. And later, him and a compadre of his called Damon Edwards coined the phrase CAMS, Cultural Automation, Measurement and Sharing, as a paradigm to explain DevOps. We'll look at that in a bit. And in 2013, Gene Kim wrote this, which is kind of like the de facto textbook for early DevOps. There are many more, I shall show some shortly. It's a textbook disguised as a novel. It's a very weird thing. Some people really like it, some people hate it. But it's kind of got so many great principles and ideas in it that they've come to form a lot of the thinking around DevOps. One of them is talking about the 3 ways of DevOps. So this is 3 ideas. The first way is about increasing flow. So going from an idea to something that's running service as quick as you can. So that talks about between these functional units, these functional teams, getting the handoffs as quick as you can, removing blockers, making sure that as soon as something's ready, the next team can get hold of it and start using it. And also decreasing the batch size is what they do in manufacturing. Rather than releasing an absolute ton load of features together, why not release just a few at a time? You get them through the system quicker. But you can get stuff to live quicker by doing that. So that's borrowing some of the ideas from this whole Toyota production system. The second way is what's called amplifying feedback loops. And that's kind of a clever way to say, letting everybody know when something's not working optimally. So if there's a problem in test, we stop the build. The build fails, the pipeline fails, we shout down and everybody else further downstream knows about it. And this can be extended further into ways of working together, pair programming, A/B testing, blue-green releases, that kind of thing, so that everybody's aware of how stuff is progressing into live. And then the third way is this culture of experimentation, this culture of never being satisfied for how fast your process is going, always looking to improve it. A learning organization. And if we also look at the idea of projects versus products, where we've got these functional teams with their handoffs, and the problem with this is twofold. First of all, the knowledge about the product dissipates every time there's a handoff or a feedback loop. So by the time you get to the ops people at the end, they don't really know why the code was written, or what it's for, or why it's there. Equally, the dev team may not have any idea of how it actually is configured and running in production. These are particularly bad things, especially if you consider, and I don't know if any of you have worked on a project, where the last milestone on the Gantt chart is go live, and then all of a sudden, all these teams are gone, and it's just the ops people left to run it. That's not a good place to be. Whereas if we think about products, and we think about taking cross-functional teams, so taking those people that were in those teams before and shaking them up and rearranging them so you've got a mix of skills in there, and giving them actual products to look after, so not something that goes live and then is forgotten about, something that goes live and is iterated upon, improved, features are added to it. So you could say, for example, this top team could be the shopping basket team. They could look after the shopping cart. The next team down could look after stock inventory, and the bottom team could look after the mobile app. But you're giving these teams ownership products, and that's really empowering and motivating. Gives people this idea of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And the thing with that as well is, if you go for that approach, they have to fix this stuff. They're the only people that know how to do it. And by doing so, you sort out this problem of this lack of knowledge and give people the opportunity to learn different stuff and do different stuff. So, you get this idea of T-shaped people, where you've got a particular specialist on the x-axis, but you've got a generalization on the y-axis. I mentioned the CAMS definition before, so we talk about culture, automation, measurement, and sharing. This is from John and Damon back in 2010. It's still kind of relevant today. It's not as relevant as it was back then because it's kind of been adopted in a lot of organisations. I'll do it in a different order. I'll do it in automation, measurement and sharing. You'll see why in a minute. So this is the idea of putting everything in version control, so not just application code, scripts, config files, that kind of thing. And infrastructure as code is if you have it. And building automation pipelines around that. So you're probably familiar with building automation pipelines for CI and CD for your application. Well, why not do that with your infrastructure as well? Why not have a mechanism of testing it and building it automatically? There's tools like Chef, Puppet, Ansible that allow you to do this stuff. And of course, we can then layer self-service tools on top of this to allow teams to spin stuff up themselves, allowing the operations teams to get on with more tooling and automation. If we look at measurement, well, we're probably all familiar with the idea of monitoring metrics, so system metrics, CPU, disk, memory, that kind of thing. But there are many other kind of metrics we can record and measure. Application metrics. How long does it take to log in? How long does it take to make a sale? How long does that transaction take? We can look at business metrics. How many sales have we had? How many sign-ups have we had? But we can also measure things like our build times. You know, is it going up? Is our build time increasing? Should we be doing something about it? When it reaches a certain time, should we look at parallelizing some of the tasks in the build pipeline? Maybe we should. And service delivery, once it's actually in service, what are these KPIs, these mean time to detect, mean time to recover, mean time to fix? These are all important metrics that can be measured to get a grasp on the reliability of your system in production. But the idea of these metrics being not just locked away in on a machine or in an email, but actually sharing them as reports and dashboards strung around the office with graphs. It encourages conversation, and it allows you to have conversations about facts rather than opinions. I don't know if you've ever had well, that database is really slow, that's why the system is slow. Well, you can quantify how slow it is and work out how fast it should actually be. You can have meaningful conversations about the numbers. And it gets away from this horrible ticket silo kind of thing where people are just throwing tickets around at one another and playing pass the parcel. But if you do all of that stuff, if you do all this automation, measurement and sharing, it's really not worth doing unless you've got this culture of collaboration and learning. So think about the Japanese workers in that factory and how they valued the opinions and the skills of the other workers. If you've not got that, this doesn't really make a lot of sense to do. It doesn't mean as much, which is a huge organisational change, but it's one that reaps a load of rewards. So, looking at SkyBetting and gaming and how we do DevOps here, I'll touch briefly on some of the organisational stuff. A lot of the speakers tonight are going to cover in some of the detail of what we do and our tooling and our approaches to stuff. But we've had a DevOps team, which is kind of an anti-pattern for DevOps now, since around 2011, where we put a team in that worked kind of as a bridge between platform and infrastructure and our development teams. And later they sort of moved on to being more automation teams and release management. But as we move towards present time, we've changed how we work a whole deal. And we moved to the Spotify tribes model. And I don't want to kind of go on about the fact that you've got tribes rather than departments or squads rather than teams. The important thing here is we've got autonomous teams doing agile software delivery. We've also got our DevOps functions, either as squads inside the tribes, but also in some cases we've got them embedded actually into the squads. It depends how mature that particular squad or tribe is and what's right for the way they work. I'll give you an example of how one of the teams has evolved, one of the tribes, the gaming tribe. And they've gone from having an operation, a DevOps function, an operations team that coordinated between all of the different squads. And they've now moved to a different model. They've moved to a platform team and a platform squad and a reliability engineering squad. So they're concerned with building platform and optimizing it in its simplest terms. But they've also pushed DevOps engineers up into the squads. And they're not there just to do the operational stuff. They're there to mentor and teach the developers about metrics, about monitoring, about logging, about performance, about capacity, so that those kind of non-functional requirements are considered as first-class citizens during the development and not bolted on at the end by the DevOps team. So in a way, we're trying to take these blue people with the red people and make the blue people a little bit more purple. Yeah? That makes sense? So I'm going to wrap up now because I've been going for probably far too long. If you want to learn this stuff and you want to know more about it, there are a load of books now. I've shown you the Phoenix Project. There's some other ones which are worth a read. These are the ones I'd recommend. If you don't like reading, because I'm not a big fan of it, there are some other resources you can check out. First of all, those DevOps Days conferences being the kind of kickoff point. There are like dozens a year now around the globe. And there are 2 in the UK in the autumn. The London one is in September. The Edinburgh one is in October. And these are meant as conferences that are accessible to developers and to operations people. These aren't conferences for consultants and for upper management. These are for practitioners. So they're really competitively priced. I think I paid 70 quid to go to the Edinburgh one on early bird. That's for a 2-day conference. The London one I think is at 150. So, they're meant to be really, really priced, really accessible so you can fund it yourself if you needed to. Another resource which I'll just shout out to, this is free. This is on edx.org. This is a course by the guy one of the inventors of CAMS, John Willis. It covers all the stuff I've been talking about in massive detail. There's hours and hours and hours of material from this guy talking about its roots, talking about where DevOps comes from, the ideas and principles behind it, much more detail than I can do tonight. It's hours of stuff, and it's ace. And finally, I said there wasn't a definition of DevOps. Well, there are loads of definitions of DevOps. But I'll leave you with one because I think you'd probably be disappointed if I didn't give you a definition of DevOps. And this is the one I like. I'll warn you now, it's a bit sweary. But if you take nothing away from the last 20 minutes of me rambling, take this next slide home tonight. This is a definition of DevOps. Okay, so DevOps means giving us stuff about your job enough not to pass the books. DevOps means giving us stuff about your job enough to want to learn all the parts and not just your little world. Developers need to understand infrastructure. Operations people need to flipping work with each other and not just occupy space next to each other. That's by John Vincent. He's quite sweary on Twitter, but you might want to follow him if you are interested in this kind of stuff. So hopefully you found that interesting. Thanks very much for listening. Thank you.